All right, today we're talking with a guest who went through an incredibly challenging period of time in their life, a relationship divorce, a business divorce, and then they actually ended up turning to psychedelic medicine, a popular topic right now. A lot of people are talking about it. And they used that to get through one of the most difficult periods in their life, and it really changed their life. So we're going to hear her story. Her name is Jessica Aiello. I'll tell you more about her in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. You know, every week we have interesting and smart entrepreneurs, founders, and CEOs from all kinds of companies. Check out the archives. We've had Netflix and Grubhub, Redfin, Gusto, Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard. Lots of great episodes for you to check out there. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25, our company where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. You can go to our website, rise25.com, learn about Podcast Copilot, or email us at support@rise25.com. All right, excited to have our guest here today. Her name is Jessica Aiello. She is now she is the Chief Strategy Officer of TCS Teams. Previously was the CEO of that company, and she has a bachelor's and master's degree from James Madison University. She's a certified interpreter, and she has a varied career. And what's interesting is she says that her friends say that there's Jessica before psychedelic medicine and there's Jessica after psychedelic medicine. And we're not going to be getting into the details of the legality of those things or anything. We're just here to share her story. And Jessica, I'm excited to hear your story. And I know you grew up actually the child of entrepreneurs. And you say that you started working at a young age. You were doing these entrepreneurial side hustles, babysitting. And at 12 years old, you went to work in the mall. That is pretty young.
I did. I was 12 years old at my first job.
That is nuts. I mean, I don't even, is that even legal? Like, how'd you even get permission to that?
I had to get a permission slip from the Career Center. My parents had to sign off on it, and the organization had to be okay with paying me. At the time, I started volunteering and then started getting paid right before I turned 13.
Wait, you were working at a watch stand, right? So you were
Yes,
volunteering? Does a watch stand need
yes.
volunteers? I mean, it's not like donating
No,
clothes for the homeless.
no, not at all. But I did learn how to fix watches and repair batteries and
You're
and all the things.
you were motivated. Jeez, yeah.
Yes.
What was that? Was it something in your upbringing? Was it your parents who were entrepreneurs? Was it just you wanted to put some money in your pocket?
I think it was more my curiosity. I have always had a thirst for learning, and I learn by doing. I want to tinker with things. I want to feel things and see things and experience them for myself. And I was really young at the time, and not a lot of people were interested in having me along for the ride, for a job, for volunteer or an internship at that age. And so I found somebody who would, and I learned a whole lot of things just about, people interaction, and I learned about collecting money, and I learned about what it was like to have a B2C business, and, all the ins and outs of transactional education and learning. So it was great. It was a great experience.
Now, you had an interesting upbringing because your parents were entrepreneurs. Your parents also are hearing impaired, so that you have your hearing, but they did not. Tell me a little bit about what that was like for your upbringing.
Yeah, so both of my parents are deaf. My first language is American Sign Language. I learned English when I was 5 years old in school. And I would say it had a really big impact on my life. It still has a big impact on my life. A lot of my passion and my career for as long as I could remember has been in the accessibility space supporting the deaf and hard of hearing community. Both of my parents being entrepreneurs, having a disability came with um, me observing just how resilient they needed to be. one as entrepreneurs, but also as people that were told over and over and over again that they were not going to be able to amount to anything or be able to succeed or start their own business. Both of my parents' families are also entrepreneurial families. They have their own family businesses, and both of my parents were excluded from those family businesses because they are deaf. And they set out to show both of their families, but also the world, that deaf individuals can do just as much as hearing individuals can do. And so watching them as I grew up inspired me a whole lot to go out and make an impact in the world and put forth my energy and my passions to create a space and to do things that were bigger than myself.
Mm. So at 12, you're working in the mall. What were the next businesses after that? What other businesses did you start?
I think it was a lot of it was just kind of going from one thing to the next, learning to see what it was that I liked, learning to see what was aligned with me. I did everything growing up from being a camp counselor to a lifeguard to working in retail to working in marketing to just about anything. I worked at the bookstore in college. I worked at several restaurants when I was in college, really anywhere that I could get a full rounded sense of what it was like to be on the front end of a business, knowing full well that my parents and the experience that I had even working with them when I was younger, working there in the summers, working there over my breaks, knowing that I would get the back end experience of what it was like to actually run a business. I wanted to gain that experience, that real world experience on the front end of things in just about anything. And that's what I spent most of my life doing.
And so your company, TCS Teams, I guess we'd say it's in the broader disability space. Um, how has attitudes changed over the last 30 years ago? I mean, 30 years or so, towards people with disabilities. It wasn't that long ago that the American Disabilities Act, the ADA law, was signed. It was in the early 90s, 30 years ago, not that long ago, which was really kind of the beginning of bringing people with disabilities into the workforce, among other things. So, just what's your observations on how society has changed for people with disabilities?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. There's been so much movement, and at the same time, so much more movement needs to happen, right? And I think that that can be said for just about anything that we are dealing with in society that has anything to do with social justice and social movement, and just the idea of creating spaces and environments where people can belong. People can belong just who they are and how they are, and the world can continue to operate around that. I think for a very long time, we were living in a society where we were taught to believe that you have to fit a box. You have to fit this mold. And if you don't fit this mold, then something is wrong with you. And you can replace the word disability with anything else, right? Other than what we have created a definition for in terms of the word normal, right? So anything other than the word normal, if you don't fit that, you can replace that word. We've seen a tremendous shift in employment. We've seen a tremendous shift in mental health. We've seen a tremendous shift in all of the ways leading towards really a true sense of inclusion and a true sense of belonging. The ADA is still in its infancy, and for the longest time, up until very recently, the federal government was the largest employer of people with disabilities because they were required to and mandated to. Now, what we're seeing is a very large shift with big companies, Amazon, Apple, T-Mobile, Verizon, all of these very large companies are creating, Microsoft, Google, are creating teams within their organization. And we see them hiring deaf people, deaf and hard of hearing people and it's been wonderful. They are learning about accessibility. They are creating accessibility for clients. They're doing it internally. They are really standing behind their own DEI practices. And so we're seeing a lot of those shifts. We're seeing a lot of just in general, people more willing to accept that that we all have differences. And I think that's really big as we kind of move forward.
I want to get into your divorce, both your business partners with your ex-husband. So you go through a marriage divorce, and you go through a business divorce. But before we get to that, you have three kids, and you actually adopted one who was born deaf. Um,
Yes.
and she came home deaf, but she didn't remain deaf. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So of I have four children today. One of them was born deaf. She was born premature, and our hearing nerve is the one of the last things to develop. She was born premature. Her hearing nerve did not develop. And in 2% of children that are born deaf with neuropathy, which means she had nerve damage, 2% of children or less are born with neuropathy, which means that they have the chance to regain that hearing that was lost from nerve damage. She was in that less than 2%. So in that 0 to 2 year time period, the nerve does have a very small chance at regeneration. And she is in that less than 2%. And we brought her home from India at 14 months. And within the first several weeks of nourishment, of being home with the family, there's, a variety of reasons on why it could have happened. She regained her hearing and hears at a normal level.
But I want to dive into how this affected you emotionally because you adopted her because she was deaf. You'd grown up with deaf parents. And you actually had some shame and guilt, I understand, around this when this happened.
Yeah. Yeah. It has been a really long journey for me. It was, for me at the time, it was heartbreaking to feel this sense of wanting something so bad and being so close to it to not getting it and feel like there was loss.
And
And that loss,
wanting to raise a deaf child?
yes, in wanting to raise a deaf child. And that loss created this major sense of grief. It created a major sense of shame and a major sense of guilt on both sides. I had told everyone that would listen that I was in the process of adopting a deaf child.
Mm.
This was both an internal drive and an external drive for me. It was the sense of, at the time, it was the sense of my identity. Having deaf parents, having deaf siblings, feeling so intertwined and feeling a part of that community, and feeling like this was something I was called to do. Um, and having an experience that was something so very different. And at the time, it was very hard for me to understand some of those pieces. And the shame and guilt of uh, not not having a deaf child after going through that experience, and the shame and guilt of telling people why I was so upset by it. Right? Many people, when they hear the story that she
They
was
think
born deaf
it's
and
they
now she
think
can
it's
hear,
miraculous. Right. They
think
think
it's
that's
a
great.
miracle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my response, I either had to hold my shame and guilt and say, yes, it's so amazing.
Or you had to try and
Or,
explain.
yeah,
Yeah.
or I had to try to
Mm.
explain it. And there was such a fear of um, what I could say, what I should say, what I wanted to say, and what people would perceive, right?
Right.
That judgment,
Like, what is
that,
wrong with you? Why don't you think it's a good
yes.
thing?
Yeah. And it took me several years to get to where I am now. I mean, she's extremely healthy and she's thriving and she's 8, she'll be 9 in February. And I really do believe today, looking back on the journey, everything happens the way that it is supposed to. It has taught me a lot of life lessons. And it's been a really impactful experience in my life.
So, I haven't personally gone through a divorce. So at the risk of drawing comparisons, it seems like there are similarities because when you go through a divorce, there's usually one emotion, right? People are like, "Oh, I'm sorry that you're going through that." When sometimes the person going through the divorce is like, "Actually, no, this is a great thing." So
Yeah.
you kind of maybe experience that as well, going through a divorce.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. People whenever there's grief, and I use the word grief because there is a sense of loss. No matter if the person is the one that wanted the divorce or initiated the divorce or did not, there's still a sense of loss and a sense of loneliness and a sense of confusion and all the things. And when there's grief involved, people really are uncomfortable and they don't know how to act. And so they say things to try to what they think is making you feel better.
Yeah.
And yes, so I think it is very similar. I think for me, there was a lot of parallel in what I was feeling and what I was experiencing. And when my daughter came home, that was just 2 years prior to the divorce. And I think, going through a divorce very soon after that experience kind of just added layers upon layers for me that at the time I wasn't willing. And I didn't have the tools. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have the tools to process any of it.
Yeah.
Right. So it became this overload of emotion and this weight, this burden, that I fell into this trap of just running from for a really long time.
Um, so you at some point start, I assume, reading up on plant medicine, hearing about plant medicine. You end up trying it at an EO chapter retreat, I believe it was, or at an EO forum retreat. Take us through that story, how that ended up happening.
Yeah. So I think it found me before I found it.
Hmm.
Uh, so a forum mate of mine, that I was really close to, had quite a bit of experience with plant medicine, and had shared a lot about it. And I had always kind of just disregarded it. It was not something that was like um, in my field at all at the time. We were on a forum retreat, and um, people will sometimes call me a catalyst for connection, or like a super connector type of person. And so we were on a EO forum retreat, and one of my forum mates had asked me to find somebody, right? Find a shaman, find somebody who can have this, who can do this experience. Even at the time, it was only going to be a few people in the forum that were going to do it. Um, and so within, a few hours, we had somebody scheduled to do medicine experience, and I had no idea what it was, and decided within minutes whether I was going to do it or not. Um,
And you
some
also
of
didn't.
the
This is not starting with a little joint here, and it's not starting with a little bit of mushrooms here. You tell what you tried,
No, no, this was jumping into a full DMT experience.
which is what? Where
Um,
does that come from?
so DMT comes from the bark, in the Amazon. It is a extremely powerful medicine. DMT is also known as the God molecule. It is very potent at even very small amounts. And it's also a very short experience in duration. So it's about 15 minutes of an experience. And so, having never done it before, I thought to myself, 15 minutes, like what could happen in 15 minutes,
Right,
right?
right.
In my mind, I'm thinking, well, I don't know anything about ayahuasca, but that is,
The
8 hours,
longer,
10
yeah,
hours.
it's like a
That's too
day long
much
thing.
for
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
Yeah, like at the
yeah.
time, that was just too much for me. And 15 minutes seemed so manageable.
Sure.
Um, and little did I know that in that 15 minutes, my life completely transformed in ways that I am still processing today. And this is, 6, 7 years later.
What was it? What was the
Um,
experience like that was so radical?
so my DMT experience was extremely visceral for me. It was extremely physical, and it was extremely visual. So I was completely transported into my thoughts and emotions. I can remember exactly the feeling where I had to let go of my ego, where I had to make a decision in a split second to fight it and stay here or trust it and surrender and just let go. And I surrendered and I let go, and it was magical and also extremely confusing, right? I had no sense of where I was. I had no sense of who I was, but I was deep inside of my feelings. Um, I vividly remember the story and the scenario and the feelings that were coming up for me around fear and shame and guilt and the feminine and the masculine. And for me, my visions of what I saw were snakes, anacondas, and they often do come in DMT or ayahuasca experiences. So it's a very powerful animal that can present itself in these experiences. And for me, there was one white anaconda and many yellow anacondas. And I won't go through the entire experience. It would take quite a bit of time, but in the end, I represented the many yellow anacondas. And at the end of my experience, I transformed into one solid yellow anaconda with lots of strength and lots of beauty and lots of resilience. And that experience for me allowed me to transform and go to some of the deepest, darkest places of those feelings and see myself, feel myself, and trust myself coming out on the other side,
I'm
having gone
thinking
through all of that.
I'm thinking about would you say this was out of character for you to have this experience at this moment in time?
It was out of character in the moment because of everything that was going on in my world, and out of character because I would not have found myself in that scenario.
And I want to ask you about what the reaction was like afterwards when you tried to tell people about it. And one amusing anecdote is before you did it, you had a boyfriend, you texted him. He was 13 years sober and said, "I'm doing DMT," and you turned off your phone.
Yes, I did. I sent him a message. Mind you, we were out of the country. I sent him a message and said, "Hey, I'm going to do this thing." And then my phone turned off. And my phone turned off for a few hours. The experience was 15 minutes, but we went there and we had this whole ceremony. And there were several of us that went. And then there was, a period of integration, albeit very short, but a period of integration. And then we get back, to where we're staying. And I think the reaction from people, most people in my life were just a bit shocked. Like, what did you do?
Yeah.
And I
And
mean,
they're
I
shocked
remember
by the
sharing.
fact that you did it, or are they shocked by the changes that they see in you?
I think at the time, so the answer is both. I think at the time it was what I did. It seemed to them that it was extremely impulsive and it wasn't well thought out, and it was just it happened so abruptly, which is not necessarily out of character, but what it was, right? What was happening was very out of character for me. And I think still to this day, there are people in my life that will tell me that they are shocked to see the change physically, emotionally, just in their connection with me, their relationship with me. So many things along the way have changed. And it's definitely been an experience that has transformed me from the inside out.
And so one of the changes that came as a result of is you said that after the medicine journey, you felt that the accessibility business had really defined you and your family in your community, and you had to figure out your identity afterwards. So talk a little bit about that journey.
Yeah. So, for the longest time, I would introduce myself as, I'm Jessica Ayala. Both of my parents are deaf. Sign language is my first language. I learned English later in school. And that's how I identified. It was, growing up or in any environment that we were in, any EO, sessions, it was like, find the one thing that is different about you. And that would always be the thing for me. It was always my identity. And it was all I knew. I ran a very successful business in the accessibility space, providing language access for deaf and hard of hearing individuals. Um, and I never allowed myself to dream that I could be anything other than what I was doing in that space and that community. And going through this experience, one of the biggest things that I realized is that is a part of me. It is a piece of me. And it doesn't define everything about who I am because I am Jessica. That is one, that is the one pillar. And then there are branches and leaves, and having deaf parents and using American Sign Language is just one of those branches, right, on the root of the tree that I stand in. And it took me a long time to understand and recognize that piece. And it's definitely something that is a daily thought of mine because it has been so many years that it's been such a deep part of me. And so my journey lately has really been redefining who I am and who I want to be and how I want to show up, knowing that my purpose here on this earth is to serve. And I serve by way of connection, community, and consciousness.
And it took you a couple of years to figure out that you were ready to replace yourself as CEO of the company and hire a new CEO. That's a long time when you are going through this own, identity crisis and trying to figure out what you want to be at the same time to have to um, do the previous role that you'd been doing for so long when you're kind of mentally checking out and moving on and also hire someone to replace yourself that can move into the existing team and fit with everyone else. That's a difficult process.
Yes, there were lots of challenging and difficult moments. I felt like I had a ball and chain tied to my leg, right? It was every time I wanted to move right, I would be pulled left, and every time I wanted to move left, I would be pulled right, and I felt so held down, right? I felt like I could not um, move forward in direction because there were so many different things that were pulling at me. Knowing that I was maxed out running and operating a business and I was burnt out, and knowing that everyone within that business needed somebody to come in and run it, plus trying to unravel basically an almost 15-year marriage relationship, plus unraveling a business with my ex-husband. There were so many layers and pieces to it that all were grabbing attention. And when I finally got to the point of realizing that this business needed somebody else at its helm and needed to be there to support it and run it and take it to the next level, um, that set me down a path of feeling much lighter, knowing that it was going to be a journey to find the right person. And thankfully, I found the right person.
And you've said that before your medicine journey, your head and your heart were really disconnected. You were driven, you were, focused on speed, weren't taking time for yourself. And after you feel like your head and your heart were more connected to one another. Explore that a
Yeah.
little bit more for me.
Yeah. So I ran I ran that business with my ex-husband at the time, my husband, working 60, 70, 80 hours a week. And the mentality that I had at the time, growing that business for 15 years was hustle, hustle, hustle. How fast can I grow? How quickly can I get there? What are the pieces I need to put in place? And it was very impulsive. Everything was just go, 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 go mentality, without taking a break and checking in and seeing how I feel and seeing how other people feel around me. It was a very hustle mindset for me. And I had always watched other people that I felt were way more in their heart. And the story that I would tell myself was that I'm so far away from that. I can't connect with that. Those people are over here in la la land and they are not able to be successful. I can be successful because I don't have to worry about my feelings. I don't have time for that. I'm just going to go, 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 go. And whatever's in my way, I'm just going to push through it. After having medicine experiences and after working with a variety of modalities and connecting to my heart and spending so much time basically coming back home and into myself and dropping into my feelings, it was amazing. It still is amazing the things that I find, who I am, the things that I like, the things that I don't like. I had never made space for them before, right? It was just suck it up and move forward. And this whole idea of choice and alignment and what feels right and what does not feel right and being able to check in with my own energy or check in with my gut um, has been a beautiful journey for me to kind of experience firsthand, but also to witness myself in that. I have spent a lot of time and continue to work with clients and support clients to really marrying the two, this mindset and heart mindset, because I used to think that you had to give up your heart to hustle. And that I would think that the people that had so much heart gave up their hustle. And it's taken me some time to really understand that the two can be married and blended in a very beautiful way. You can hustle and you can hustle hard with heart, right? And there's a really beautiful way to do that. There's a beautiful way to make an impact in this world while hustling and stay very connected to who you are and very aligned to your heart.
How did you figure out, having gone through this personal experience and journey, how did you figure out that you wanted to be involved in doing this work and helping others?
I don't know that I figured it out. I think it just came to me. I think, you know, in I was sitting in a Hape session, having just finished Hape, and part of
And what is
my
that?
ritual.
What is that, Hape?
Hape is a indigenous tobacco that is used. It is blown up the nose. You can self-serve it or you can have somebody serve it to you. Um, and it is not a psychedelic experience. I would say it's more of a master plant medicine. It is for me, it is a emotional and mental experience. It has some physical experience just from a physical discomfort perspective because something is blown up your nose. But I have a very rich and deep relationship with that plant medicine. And I use it a lot of times to center myself and ground myself and also ask for guidance. In one of my Hape sessions afterwards, one of the things that came to me was that I realized that from the moment that I was born, I was here to serve, right? Having deaf parents and being hearing, I was here to serve and support them and make sure that they had what they need and they were taken care of. That for a long time, to me, I thought, oh, I have to serve others. And I forgot to serve myself along the way. And what I realize now, and even after this Hape session, is yes, I am here to serve. And that serving only works when I can fully serve myself. I am able to show up for other people and serve them. And that's really what's led me to this experience is I feel and I am extremely whole when I know that others have a place where they are seen and heard and safe and belong and they feel included for all that they are.
Yeah. It's been really fascinating, and we're recording this at the end of 2024, but it's been fascinating for me over the last few years to learn about the history of psychedelics, particularly in the United States from the 1960s to now. And and there's been kind of a renaissance and a lot of interest in it. There's also been some legal setbacks where there's been some rulings on a federal level that would have expanded access to various different psychedelics. How do you think about that? Because it is still a Schedule One drug. It is still, in spite of overwhelming evidence that it's not addictive, that it's not damaging, certainly as much as other things which are more socially acceptable, like alcohol. How do you think about that? Dealing with something that is part of your vocation now, but that does have a lot of risk involved.
Yeah, so there's definitely risks, right? For me, the risks outweigh the rewards, I should say, the
The
rewards
benefits,
outweigh the risks.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, because I know that the work that I'm doing impacts so many people, right? It's a ripple effect. So if I can impact just the first line of people that I work with, they will be able to impact their first line of people, and it changes. And it is this ripple effect that will ripple across the world. Um, and that's really important to me. I think that we are in the very early stages of change. And I think there's a pendulum, and that pendulum always swings, right? It's always going to swing. I think a lot of the reason that we are where we are is because there's just not enough information. There's not enough education about it. I would love to see us do more by way of educate when it comes to preparing and integrating these experiences, harm reduction, understanding why people do these experiences and what happens in the experience, than just pushing for these medicines to be regulated and legalized. Because once people get an understanding, a real sense of understanding about what these medicines are, what they do, the impact they have on us, how you prepare to do these medicines, what happens after you do these medicines, I think when people get a better understanding of it, and a holistic package, it's an easier answer of it's a no-brainer, right? Um, I also think that we live in a world where there's a wide variety and a wide range of people. And to some extent, there needs to be some regulation on this. There is danger in everything. That is true for alcohol. It is also true for coffee. It is true for food, right? So
Mhm.
there's a spectrum here. And I think that it is important for things to be regulated. And I think it's going to take us time to get there.
You mentioned you have four kids. I have four kids also. How do you talk to the younger generation about this?
So I think it's a very personal preference. It's what we feel comfortable with. Um, Talking to the kids about it versus having the kids do it versus having the kids be around it. There's a lot of layers to it. A lot of it circles back to some earlier feelings that I shared before around shame and guilt, right? There's shame and guilt around hiding things from our children, and then our children growing up and saying, I wish that our parents just told us, right? Did they not trust us enough to just tell us? There's shame and guilt of, well, if I tell them, what are other people and what are their friends' parents going to think? And should I be shameful for that, or should I be guilty about it? So I want to hide it from them. For us, it's a balance. Our kids, we host a lot of indigenous tribes and communities at our house and our property, and our children are around them. And I think that that's really important because a lot of these medicines do have such an indigenous influence over us. And in those cultures, they grow up into it, right? There is no before medicine, after medicine. What does this medicine mean? They grow up into it. It's an everyday experience, kind of like you're brushing your teeth. Not that they do medicine every day, but that they grow up in it and it's normalized for them. And so our children have been around many different tribal members, many different indigenous communities. And while they don't sit in medicine, we do talk to them about why the tribes are here and what they're doing, and that they bring indigenous medicines. The children know about plant medicine in general, right? They understand about cannabis. They understand that plants are food and plants have medicine and medicinal properties and what that means. Now, do they understand in full detail? No, they don't. And then our children are very used to seeing us sit with Hape and be around us serving Hape and experiencing Hape. They have not experienced it themselves. But one of my children actually knows how to serve it and is very comfortable with it. And so I think, again, I think it's a personal preference with children. It's also very delicate because it's something that you want children to come into on their own and have their own curiosity around it, and appreciate it for what it is.
Jessica, this has been great. I'd love to wrap up. I like to give my guests a little bit of a space and opportunity to call out and acknowledge anyone who has helped them in their journeys, in particular peers or contemporaries, maybe mentors. Who would you want to acknowledge?
Um, yeah, so a couple of people came to mind for me. I think the first person is my forum mate, who's been a forum mate of mine for 10 years now, Borzu as a Daftari. And he is the reason that I came into medicine. He was the forum member that had shared a lot about it with me. And so I owe him a great amount of gratitude for being by my side before my medicine journey, during my medicine journey, and still to this day post medicine journey for sure.
Yeah, cool. Jessica, where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you?
JessicaAiello.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, Jessica Lee Aiello. And they can reach out to me, any other way.
Awesome. Jessica, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.